Hello, welcome everyone to the live stream. It's been a hot minute since I've been on, so this is actually quite nerve-wracking. I'm nervous for the first time in ages coming onto the stream, but yeah, how are you doing, Kieren?
I am great, actually. Really looking forward to this. I can't believe you're nervous. It sounds so unlike you to be nervous for stuff
I
like
know.
this.
I started to get real sweaty as well. It's not a good time, but it's fine. I'm with you, the King, Kieren, to go over what will be a stream focusing on Project Rebalance, as well as some information around the Colosseum specifically coming from Rumour Part 1 release. So yeah, we did recently release the second blog regarding the Project Rebalance. The first one was about skilling. This one is around NPC Defence Changes. Today, we're going to discuss the reasons for the proposed changes, as well as thoughts that went into them. But we're obviously not limited to just that. As I mentioned, we are going to be talking about the Colosseum, and we are here to answer all your questions about the game in general. So if you have any, please at Old School RS, the mods will be collecting them, and we'll do our best to go over them if there is time, but we do have a lot to go over. Now, a quick heads up, we are aware of ongoing issues with the ranged combat in the beta worlds at the moment. We're hoping to deploy a fix for those tomorrow, and as a result, we'll extend the beta into next week. But if you don't have a chance to participate, don't worry, because the next batch of Project Rebalance proposals, which will be around item changes, will feature an open beta as well. So those changes will also coincide with the NPC Defence Changes, so you get to try both out at once. So not too much of a panic anyway. Right. Let's get over some announcements, and then I'm going to stop speaking. Actually, I'm not going to stop speaking. I've got a whole bunch to go over quickly before I do. But anyway, announcement time. So, !Rebalance. If you haven't seen it already, this is a link to the Project Rebalance blog, which focuses on NPC defense changes. Is what we'll be talking about today. It includes things like new range defense types, elemental weaknesses and scaling, as well as information on the open beta and a few more things. !Video. If you can't be bothered to read and you'd rather just listen or watch something on YouTube while you're AFKing something on the side on RuneScape, then !Video is the one for you. We partnered with Coxie to go over an explainer on how Project Rebalance with NPC Defense Changes works. So check that out with !Video. And then lastly, !Game Update, which is picking up from where we left off. We're back with more improvements to Rumour Part 1. We released drop rates for Perilous Moons as well as the Colosseum. And there are a few tweaks in there. Speaking of tweaks, I believe that Modsani is in the process of updating that game update news post to let you know what's due to be changing in what will hopefully be next week. Can't promise absolutely everything though, but we do have a bunch of Colosseum specific changes to make. And I'm going to quickly fire through these. Now remember, they will be in the news post, so don't worry about writing them down all on a notepad unless you really want that karma early on Reddit. But let's talk about bees first. They'll be given a longer delay before they respawn, as well as a longer delay before they move to the next tile, and the visibility of them will be improved. So all round, a bit of a bee improvement there. Talking of Doom, there will now be 3 tiers of Doom. Each tier will allow you to take up to 15, 10 or 5 stacks respectively before meeting your end. Doom will now reset back to 0 stacks at the end of each wave, and we're removing the Soul Reaper Axe and Divine Potion effects from adding to stacks of Doom as well, so it should make it a little bit nicer to use. As for Myopia, we'll be removing the ability to auto-cast spells without being affected, but you'll still be able to manually cast with that modifier active on there. Then there is Relentless. We're going to be changing how the additional accuracy is applied to monster hits. Stack 1 will ignore 33% of your defense, Stack 2 ignores 66% of the defense, and then Stack 3 ignores all of the defense. All of the additional damage per stack is left unchanged. For Totemic, we'll be increasing the cooldown before respawning a new totem if the first is killed, and the amount of healing will be reduced overall. So nice little change there. Doom Scorpion is being removed. Even though they'll be removed, we'll put them somewhere that you can visit them in game if you really want to go find that cute little Death Scorpion. There's a new modifier that's going to be added called Manti Mayhem. Manticore Orbs attacks will become stronger each time this is chosen. So there'll be 3 tiers of it. The orb attacks will become stronger with each tier that you progressively choose. So it makes missing your flicks more punishing, but it doesn't change how many times that you would need to flick. Essentially, if you're really good at changing prayers, then this is a pretty easy pickup for you, I think. And now let's talk about drop rates. Sunfire Fanatic pieces and Echo Crystals, they'll be obtained from completing Wave 3 onwards as opposed to Wave 6 onwards, and will be made more common. And for unique improvements, there's a few here, so get ready. In regards to Echo Crystals, Guardian Boots will be permanently converted to Echo Boots when you use a crystal on them, so you don't have to worry about what it was before. They'll be adding a toggle so that you can turn the effect on or off, so you can decide when you want to use charges and when you don't. Echo Crystals will give more charges. I think we're going with 6,000 up from 2,500. And the boots themselves will be able to hold 30,000 charges up from 10,000. And then lastly, we'll be increasing the ALC price of the crystals just to more correctly reflect their actual value. For the Tonalztics of Ralos, there is live editing. The Echo Boots will hold apparently 60,000 charges. Yes, 60,000 charges, not 30,000. So a whole load more charges then. That's 600 times the amount more than before. But 6 times the amount, sorry.
Live mathematics has gone wrong.
There's a reason why I do words and not math. So for the Tonalztics, the glaives, we'll be removing the 50% cap on defense reduction from its special attack, and also increasing the out price. There are a few keen-eyed among you that were using it when it was first released, and it actually worked this way, so that it could reduce the defense down to whatever it was, past 50% cap. Some people used it for speedrunning, things like Tier B and stuff. But that was a bug. It wasn't intended. It's not how we originally described it, but we're going to be putting that back because it seems like quite a nice change to just up the usability of the item. And then lastly, for Dizana's Quiver, we are going to be redesigning it to look much more in line with feedback, and you'll be able to see the updated designs in the news post. Okay, there's me done. Whole load of changes. How do you feel about the Colosseum overall, Kieren?
I'm glad you could just take a breath, a breather. Thanks. From that.
I'm going to take a breath and a sip of
information.
My juice.
The first thing I think I want to talk about is just quickly on the Sunfire, the prayer gear. A lot of people have been bringing up the point in the early blogs. We talked about how the prayer gear would be available from the early waves and just be more accessible than the other rewards and stuff. To some extent, I think we just have to hold our hands up and we let that slip and put it in a place which didn't really deliver on what we said. That's obviously part of why we've changed it, and ultimately, by talking about the drop rate, the information, it's allowed players to give us that feedback, which we're now adjusting. There's also still more nuance to that, but I don't want to go too deep with that. But things change a lot through development. Earlier on in development, Wave 6 might not have been perceived to be as hard as it ended up being, and so on. There's so many factors that go into why these things happen. It's not just necessarily malpractice or whatever, or bad intent, so to speak. There's obviously been a lot of feedback over the Colosseum as a whole, and I think a lot of it's obviously been around modifiers. I think one thing we could have probably done better is tell people a bit earlier that we were going to be making changes. I think we've had so much feedback to deal with Far More that ultimately it's just a case of we haven't necessarily got to all of it just yet. But we knew pretty soon on that modifiers were going to need adjusting, and it's not like we've been ignoring the feedback. It's just now has been the time we've got to it. And based on what I saw in the chat when you were reading through them, it seems like most people are receiving these modifier tweaks quite positively, but obviously keep that feedback coming when you see the news post, and we'll adjust them to act fairly for the content. As a whole, I feel like there's some learnings we've got from the Colosseum. And I think even when you go back and look at Tombs of a Mascot, that modifiers, invocations, I just don't feel like have worked as well as we might have hoped. That's not to say we're going to go and rip them out and completely redo the content or anything like that, because that would be way too excessive. These pieces of content now exist, and that's going to be awesome. It makes them unique. But it has been quite challenging to get them as right as possible. We wanted to have a whole risk versus reward element, right? Take the more dangerous modifier in exchange for more glory, but glory probably isn't serious and important enough to justify that either. And then it's all kind of in conflict with this idea that you've got beat it once, get the quiver, and move on. And lots of people will just play it like that. Not everyone's going to want to grind it. So And there's a few ideas in conflict that has meant some of the concepts haven't quite delivered on maybe what we would have hoped for them. But we've learned a lot of this. It's not the last time we'll do an end game challenge like this. And I think a lot of this sort of thinking is already in our minds for what we do in the future, the next opportunity we do with something like this.
Well, thank you so much for the insight, Kieren. That was way more in depth than I was at least anticipating. I think it's important to say as well that, that the Colosseum is good content. Despite everything that you've just said there, it's still fantastic content. People are still really happy with it overall. Obviously, there are feedback changes that we look to make, but to be able to come away from a really solid piece of content going out and still have learnings and things that we can take away to improve on in the future is I think it's just a really good point, because it just makes me personally excited for what can come after this.
Yeah.
What can be better than that now that we've done this so many times. I say so many twice, TOA and Colosseum. What is the next kind of like modifier system looking like, if any? So super cool. Okay, let's go over to Project Rebalance then, which will be the next part of the stream. Kieren, do you want to maybe give us some insight into the background and motivation for things like the defense change stuff?
So, overall, what we're trying to do is create more space for rewards, make existing gear that maybe isn't as useful as it could be more useful, etc. Essentially, I mean, this speaks to the whole wider ambition with Rebalance is, what have we already got that we can just improve by just changing some numbers? Not necessarily stuff that's going to be really expensive and time-consuming, where we're doing a full rework or something, but just looking at what we have and tweaking. So, one of the problems with this game, is we've talked about it so many times, is power creep. It's one of people's favorite buzzwords and things to talk about. But ultimately, new content needs new rewards. Players love to tell us they want a new raid. Players want new bosses. They want new content. But it also needs to come with a reward that justifies the challenge that encounter gives you. Otherwise, at the end of the day, no one will play it. Certainly won't play it very long. So, how do we keep on coming up with new meaningful rewards without just suddenly being at like tier 95 weapons in a few years? We need more space. And Melee is pretty good at that, for instance. So, Melee's got Slash, Stab, Crush. This seemed like an opportunity. What more can we do to spread out the utility of different items within ranged, within magic? And by the nature of the changes, which obviously we'll go into more detail and with more questions soon, but like splitting up ranged defenses, targeting the elemental spellbook, we're able to target elements of range and magic that currently are massively underutilized. With Melee, so many times you can just get by using a whip for everything. It's nice now that actually you'll feel a little bit more rewarded for paying a bit more attention and taking a bludgeon or something like that. So, really, we're viewing these as they should be long-term beneficial changes for future projects, for the existing game, and it is all with that just long-term health of the game in mind. I do appreciate some of this stuff can sound a little scary when we're changing quite a lot of numbers on different existing creatures, but it is with that intent.
Awesome, thanks, Kieren. I think one thing that's just worth pointing out early on as well is that I saw a lot of people commenting when it came to the extra variety, having to relearn the game, and that really just isn't what we're aiming for here, right? You should still be able to carry on playing old school the exact same way that you do now and literally if any difference at all. Virtually none. Your experience should be pretty much the exact same as it was before. It's just that, say for example, if you were at Gargoyles and you were whipping them before, you can carry on whipping them and you're still going to kill them just as fast, but it might just be as good or just a bit better to use a crush weapon, which is what they're meant to be weak against. The intention isn't to make you relearn the entire game. It is just to open up more opportunities for us in the future, as opposed to just going back and revamping everything that's been out in the past. So I really like the motivation for it. I think that it's actually a really solid set of changes. When it was first proposed to us, the Project Rebalance, to kind of like communicate it to the players, I was absolutely terrified, because it did just seem like, the previous Project Rebalance we did took quite a while to get into the favor of players enough for us to be able to release it. Whereas as soon as I saw the design, I knew that this one was going to be so easy to kind of like just put out there and just let people experience it, see what it's like, and have a lot of change for the future. We do have a whole bunch of questions that I want to go through. I think you covered over kind of like what the vision or long-term plan for how they might alter reward space and stuff, as well as the motivation. So let's talk about, first of all, a question around elemental weaknesses. So we have NPCs that will be weak to fire, water, and earth. What about air?
So at first, the reason that there's none with air currently is that we felt the benefit of air is that it's the cheap option. Where there's no elemental weakness, it will be definitively the best because it costs you less to use. But we discussed it earlier, and we feel like it's maybe a bit of a hard line to take. There's no reason why we can't have stuff that's got air weaknesses. So we certainly will, and things like ghosts come to mind as a good option. But we probably won't have as many weaknesses with air as we do with the slightly more expensive spells. It's not exactly a colossal difference either, right? You're talking a few extra elemental runes and they don't cost much. And that's if you're not using, something that conserves runes for you.
Sure. Would there be a possibility that there could be dual weaknesses, so that there could be like 10% air but 20% water? So it still has some effect, but there is still progression for you having different spells.
Not currently at the minute. I wouldn't necessarily say we should rule that out, because that might well be suitable. But obviously, in many cases, it's really obvious, right? An ice giant is going to be weak to fire, or a fire elemental should be weak to water, right? These are so intrinsically obvious, and I do want it to try and be as simple as possible. So obviously, no one really carries Monster Examine around, right? Most people go to the wiki and see somebody else has already monster examined it and put the info there. But how can we mitigate that, right? You should be able to see a monster and just have a good guess at probably what it is. So it wants to be as obvious as possible, and as simple as possible. The more complex we get with multiple weaknesses, maybe that doesn't help with that. But yeah, I don't want to draw a line and say we'll never do it.
Cool. All right, that makes sense. Thank you for answering. What about the delay on the standard spellbook when auto-casting and moving? Will anything happen to that?
So we have already said this is technically part of a future blog for Rebalance with other tweaks, but I think we can already say yes. We will be tweaking this so that there will be no delay on autocasting. As it's really holding back essentially the core of magic, right? If you're using actual spells, it just hurts you needlessly. That's our thoughts anyway.
Cool. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. This is a longer question, but maybe a quick answer. Instead of having each individual dragon having its own random elemental weakness, why not have them be consistent and make all metal dragons weak to earth and all chromatic dragons weak to water? That way it's intuitive and easy to remember.
This is the plan. I think we've just made a mistake somewhere, and essentially the answer is metal dragons will be weak to earth, chromatic dragons will be weak to water. So it will be, obviously it's not all dragons are weak to the same, but each type of dragon will be having the same weakness.
Nice, makes sense. Thank you. Is there a good reason to make the hold on? Apparently, I'm forgetting how to speak. Is there a good reason to make the defense type based on ammo and not the weapon itself, seeing as the type of weapon and the type of ammo are heavily tied together?
So our thoughts on this is it's basically the same thing. In basically every case, the ammo type is restricted based on the weapon. So, like, bows will always use arrows, for instance. So there's obviously some crossover. We have talked a little bit about some exceptions, and we feel like we're settling on we've made the right call. But for instance, like longbows. Should longbows fire arrows but with heavy weighting rather than standard, for instance? That might be one example. And we ran with that idea a little bit earlier, but ultimately just come to the conclusion that it leads to confusion. Is twisted bow a heavy bow? What about others? Twisted Bow is probably more like a longbow than a shortbow, but we do want that to be linked to standard and not heavy. So it leads to different issues. So we feel quite happy with the way we're going. It's not to say we can't have mechanics that interact with this in future, though. But for now, pretty straightforward and simple. You know, your bolts, javelins, and so on will be heavy. Your arrows will be standard, and things like darts will be light. So that's really where we're going with it. We're quite happy with that and plan to stick with that.
Awesome, thank you. Simple is pretty much always better, especially in old school. So thanks, Kieren. Are we planning to adjust more existing NPCs down the line, or are we just setting the scene for future stuff?
So we've obviously done not everything in the game. If anybody actually goes and looks at the full spreadsheet, we haven't exactly listed every single creature, but we have tried to target all the main stuff, the things you're likely to fight quite often on Slayer tasks, in PVM, and so on. But we haven't quite gone to everything. We did feel it was safer to start with probably a smaller set and make sure we get this right before we go out and do a future batch. But we might well go and do a future batch based on how this goes. We're unlikely to be adjusting them willy-nilly week by week, and you're not going to just see news posts constantly with things changing. Because, like you said, Ayiza, you were nervous about this. I was nervous about this. I think it is quite scary. We've all played this game for years and years, and this can contend with your existing knowledge, or at least that's how it feels like. It feels like it can do that. Nor do I want something that changes this week to change again in another couple of weeks, and so on. Whilst the core weaknesses with like Crush, Stab, and Slash aren't necessarily changing a huge amount, what we are introducing is all of a sudden now you need to probably learn what elemental weaknesses things have, and you need to learn what range type weakness it has. This is new information. So there's a bunch of stuff that you're going to have to get to grips with. Nothing's exactly a massive cognitive burden, though. It's nothing different to what you've already come across with like Stab, Slash, and Crush. But yeah, we don't want to make it an ongoing fiesta of change because we know that comes with a burden cognitively. So what you'd expect probably is this first batch to go out, and there might be a couple of creatures you're not happy with. We might obviously tweak those in the week or two following that launch. But long term, maybe another batch and similar with that, but we're not going to be changing things constantly and tinkering.
Awesome, makes sense. Thank you. Would you think there would be a time though where, for example, the first batch that we do does cover quite a wide range of NPCs? So you said not all of them. Would we be looking to then add more NPCs down the line in further batches to have different weaknesses and such, so that eventually is the aim so that every NPC in the entire game is covered?
So yeah, I mean there's a distinction, right, between being covered or being changed, because sometimes we might not want to change it. We might be content with it having no specific weakness or no specific elemental weakness, and that's fine. So in many cases, that might be the decision we've intentionally made. There's plenty of things that exist in the game that have 0 stab defense, 0 crush defense, 0 slash. They're equivalently weak to all of them. I would very much expect similar with elemental weaknesses, with range weaknesses, and so on. So, yeah. It's not like you're going to see every single creature change in some capacity.
Brilliant. Thank you. I appreciate the info. Next question is around the tomes. And someone has asked, instead of nerfing the tomes of fire and water, why not also add a tome of air and earth? Make all of them simply buff that particular element and move the curse buffs from the tome of water somewhere else.
So, we probably will do a Tome of Air and Earth at some stage. Not with the Rebalance project, but I'm sure we'll find space and opportunities to add them. But that doesn't mean we don't want to nerf them. The reason we want to nerf it is because we're buffing the Elemental Spellbook in this weakness fashion. And none of us liked the fact, if you wanted to do any decent damage with the Elemental Spellbook, you have to use the Tome of Fire, otherwise it's going to be rubbish. This makes it a bit more balanced. It's less dependent on one specific item. and it means other offhand magic items can be useful to you still. Obviously, the Tome of Fire is still decent. It's not like we're making it completely useless, but currently, it's to do fire damage, you're completely dependent on Tome of Fire, and that's not right. To be honest, that kind of makes the reason it was done originally is because we knew the elemental spellbook is weak.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember it coming out. It was just a really easy way to fix the problem, but obviously it was a band-aid fix, right? When you look at it holistically, the bigger picture in mind, as opposed to what this is, which is a much more widespread fixing the problem at its root. All right, well, we'll move on to the next question. Someone is asking around ranged weapons like Thrownaxes, Ballista, or Longbows. Essentially weapons without many widespread PVM uses. Yeah. How do they slot into the proposal?
So Longbows, I think we might do a stat pass. So if anyone's familiar with them right now, obviously they are utterly useless. You get the longer range. Maybe there's the odd niche case where that's useful, but by and large, they hit way slower than a short bow, yet have stats. I think, are they exactly the same? If not marginally higher? It's irrelevant, basically. We're going to buff their stats. It's not necessarily going to mean suddenly you're debating between the magic shortbow and the magic longbow to which you'll use. But it will feel at least like it makes a bit more sense. We're not going to offer that suddenly. It's going to be meta in terms of spots. So that's slightly different to the range weakness side. They'll be shooting arrows. It'll be standard ammo. Ballista, we realised they're a bit rubbish in PVM. Obviously, they were originally designed like that, really, to be primarily PvP weapons. So right now there will be heavy weapons. That fits for them. But this defense change helps with this problem. So, like, whilst it might not be the case that today or after this update that Ballista's suddenly really useful in PVM, if in future we make a boss that's particularly weak to heavy ranged weaponry, at least Ballista might start being a valid option. And currently we don't really have the tools as designers to make that even a viable option. Nex is a good example. Obviously, for anybody familiar with what Nex was originally in 2011, and obviously we had that in mind when we were porting it to old school, as most people did it with crossbows back then. That's not necessarily the meta strategy with Nex in old school, and we didn't really have the tools to balance it to be that way because we lacked this sort of way to balance an encounter. Thrownaxes, they're so trash. We don't exactly know where they fit yet, but we probably are looking at this as we can't fix every single problem with this. We'll have to think about Thrownaxes in future. I don't think we're going to look to do anything with them just yet. I did kind of joke that maybe they need a blowpipe for Thrownaxes. Don't know what that could look like. Not a blowpipe,
that would be
imagine some sort of like mecha arm and you just throw them really hard or something. I don't know.
Mecha arm.
Fits old school, right?
my head went to something similar to the cannon, but instead of cannonballs, you put Thrownaxes in there and it like flies them out. It's extremely dangerous. You're going in with the Dwarven Tech mechanical armor.
Dwarven Tech arm, absolutely. No, I don't know. I'm just joking, but Thrownaxes are so useless. Obviously, we all need to think bigger about how they fit. Their stats, obviously, we could just adjust their stats, but I'm still not convinced that'll solve them. They're so slow. Their only meta is to get you into DKs. That's been the case for a long time.
They're used in PvP
Dragon
too. The Dragon Axes, they get used a little bit in PvP for some combos, which is sick. I'm sorry, I'm so sidetracked now. I'm just thinking of all the different cool combinations that we could have. I want a mounted Ballista that you can put down. Imagine having that slot in the middle of the Colosseum and it just pops everything for you. Yeah. All right. I'm gonna get chat to get on my side on this one, maybe eventually. All right. Let's go on to the next question. Are the magic changes intended to be in the place of a weapon that would slot between Sang/Shadow?
Not really. Obviously, in some places this might fill a little bit of the gap, right? Where somebody's got a particularly strong weakness to something, you might find the elemental spellbook becomes really good. But there's still obviously a gap. between those two weapons that we could fill in future. So I see that as still something we could potentially explore with future reward space.
Cool. All right. What about powered staves? Are they elementally typed? For example, is the Trident water and is the shadow, or are they considered typeless?
They are typeless. That's where we are at the minute, and we feel like that's the right choice. Now, that it's the right choice because powered staves will continue to be useful. They already are useful, and it's the elemental spellbook that needs the love and needs this system to sort of help support it to become more useful. That said, giving it a lot of thought, I feel slightly uneasy about the fact we're rolling out a weakness system and it only interacts with this one element of this one part of magic. So maybe this is stuff we can explore in the future. We're just not exactly sure how to do it yet. Because if you imagine the Trident of the Seas suddenly is water damage, we're still in the same position where the water spells on the elemental spellbook are rubbish. So you see the problem we're trying to deal with. As much as it might make sense, Flames of Zamorak obviously being even that's not even a powered staff, that's a spell. But currently that won't interact with the elemental weaknesses. Perhaps the argument could be it's evil fire, it's not actually fire, but stupid arguments aside, it's something we need to keep in mind. Because it goes in conflict with that goal of making the elemental spells good.
Okay. I mean, it definitely makes sense when you explain it like that. So essentially, the options are open at the moment. We just don't know what those options are, but we are going to consider it. And if there's a way we can make it work, then we potentially will. But it won't be with this patch, like in any way, shape, or form. That's something for the future, just to make it absolutely clear to everyone who is watching.
Yeah. There's no reason we couldn't have a new weapon in future or a spell in future that we think is suitable to interact with this system.
Cool. Okay. Do you have any further thoughts on NPC defense information being gated behind 66 Magic and Dream Mentor? Is there some other way we could put this info in front of people?
I would love it to be a bit more accessible. But no matter what we do, people use the wiki, and that is the best way to find that information with way more helpful additional stuff. So at the end of the day, there's options we could do. We could add an in-game sort of monster bestiary, whatever the right word is.
We have the combat achievement stuff includes bosses, which has like info on them anyway. So like it could reasonably fit in there, right?
In theory, maybe we could add stats to that. Obviously, that doesn't go for everything, but like, no. I totally could imagine a sort of in-game like lookup system. Imagine it fills out, right? Like you could easily imagine this sort of system. Your first time you kill a gargoyle, it adds a little bit of info. When you kill 10, it adds even more info, and when you add 50, you got the full lot. Something like that, right? And you could have that for almost every creature in the game, and it would fill up this ultimate sort of database that you could have access to.
I'm getting distracted by chat here, Kieren. They're all saying the Pokedex. I'm like, yeah, okay.
Well, it's basically,
I'm definitely not biased when it comes to adding Pokemon into the game. Let's do the Pokedex.
So you could have that, and
Druid even, sorry,
flavor text, stats, etc. But it's just, I'm also sat here like we only have so many developers, and this is the more boring part of game development. And there's so many awesome things we could be doing, and I think it just comes down to, just look up the wiki. So I don't want to necessarily do something as ambitious as like a Pokedex. Maybe one day, because it does sound cool. But the cheaper option is just provide Monster Examine on a different spellbook or lower its requirements, remove the quest requirements. Like, there's obviously options like that, so we could think about it that way as well. Maybe that would help. At the end of the day, most content, you don't want to be on Lunas taking runes for Monster Examine in the middle of a raid or something, right? You're just going to do that on a one-time use. Could you just add it to a right-click examine and remove the spell entirely? Like, there's so many ways you could look at it. If we come up with a good one, I'm sure we can go with it.
Fair enough. Thank you. Well, we've absolutely blasted through all of the questions that we had prepared, but we do have a whole bunch from chat. We've got some kind of like general questions, or some that are focused very much around what's been happening recently in chat. Which would you prefer to go through? Ones that are related to the topics we've been going over now, or more generic in regards to Project Rebalance?
Anything you think people will want to hear.
All right, okay, I'm gonna have some fun with this one then. Hold on. Kieren, can you please explain the lore behind why would metal be weak to earth?
I don't know. I don't have the explanation. Maybe somebody has one, but it kind of makes more sense. Sometimes you just get that vibe, right? Like it just feels like people are shouting rust and stuff like that. I feel like it makes more sense than others. Fire, it's definitely not, because they breathe fire and stuff. That doesn't make much sense. Water makes sense for the chromatic dragons. They're fire-breathing creatures, but the metal would defend them from that. But I imagine you've got hard sheet of metal, like stuff like an earthquake would shatter that metal. Like I just kind of feel like it kind of makes sense in that way.
He's been thinking about it. Okay. All right.
Round type beats steel type in Pokemon. That's the logic.
All right, we just go back to Pokemon weaknesses. I like that. Okay. Another one is then, why is magic weakness made its own thing instead of splitting the defense like ranged? I don't know how you would do it any differently. I think isn't this
so? Well, that's it, right? Magic has already got elements in the elemental spellbook, and so it makes sense to leverage those. But I think it's very easy to argue that we should go for a cookie cutter approach, where magic, melee, and range are basically the same thing. I think the fact that magic is unique is a good thing, and leaning into the spellbooks helps with that. Powered Staves actually makes magic a little bit more like range, because it's just swing on a weapon, take some ammo, but it's runes, and you click on the monsters and attack. The spellbooks are the interesting part of magic. I want to lean into that more, because that is what it brings to the game, right? It's different.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want all three styles of combat to just basically dial back down to the same thing, but it's dealing a different color of damage on the screen or whatever.
Fair point. Okay, I have what is actually a really interesting question, and I saw that it was asked in chat as well. I actually saw it pop up, and I wanted to ask it in the moment, but this one comes in and says, are there any plans to adjust the base spellcast XP in line with elemental spell scaling? So for those that don't know or haven't seen the blog, I think the proposal is that you'll unlock all of the elemental spells at the same level now, right? So there won't be the level tiers, or did I get that completely wrong? Can't remember if
I think you got that wrong.
Around. Okay, thank
I
God.
think the proposal is you unlock them at the same levels as you do today.
Yeah.
So, you have Wind Strike at level 1.
I'm glad you're here, Kieren.
Is it level 9 for Fire Strike? I don't want to be embarrassed by my lack of knowledge.
I mean, I'll just embarrass myself anyway, so just do it. Do it, make me feel better.
The idea, 13 for Fire Strike. There you go, I'm wrong. I don't know why I said 9.
It's the damage that's scaling, right? The damage is being normalized across all of them. That's what it was. That's where I got mixed up.
The damage at level 1 Wind Strike will be lower, but by the time you're level 13, Wind Strike will deal the same damage as Fire. That's the idea, and the same for the other elements. We still felt it was meaningful to unlock spells as you go. That's still got use cases. It's still going to be powerful to you, because you'll unlock spells that are useful for more places. And it also feels nice to unlock things as you level. So rather than saying, hey, you need them all at level 1 now, right? I just don't think that works quite as well.
Cool. So the base XP cast will just be the same as it is now.
So XP, I don't actually know.
Okay.
For damage, it will work like that. For XP, I'm not 100% sure. That's a good question, though, and we should have an answer for it, because I don't actually know.
Okay, well, we can clarify that. I'm pretty sure it would make a lot of sense if the spells are unlocked at their respective levels as they are now, then the base XP that you get for casting it, which in most cases really just affects people who are splashing, I imagine, will remain the same as it is, because it's still that higher magic level, so on and so forth. And it's just that the extra damage you deal will be on top. So wind strike and wave, whatever else other wind spells you use, will end up being more XP than they were before if you're dealing damage, but for splashing they won't, because you'll inherently deal more damage now. So
I agree with that. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, but we'll confirm that anyway. Thank you for the question as well. And apologies if I confused anyone at the start, but I think it was actually a good idea. I'm definitely coping here, but I think it was a good idea to confuse you all so that Kieren could clarify what it actually worked like, because everyone really resonated with that change. So I think it was a good segue into it. Okay, what about something like the Bowfa? How does that fit into ranged weapon types?
It's a bow. It shoots arrows. It will be standard weighting, essentially. Straightforward, really. It's probably, in most cases, it'll be the thing that seems obvious, because I think that is pretty much the decision we've made on everything.
Nice. All right, makes sense. I think that was covered in the blog anyway. I'm sure I read that when I was getting it uploaded, but if not, there's the clarification. Are you pleased with the place elemental spells are based on your newsletter? While harm is more competitive, elemental spells against weaker monsters are still worse than Trident, the mid-level magic option.
I think that's fine. The game's going to offer you things where harm is better. There's in plenty of places. The game's going to offer you places where the Trident is better. And that's good. That is kind of what we want, right? If you think about the amount of reward space we want to be viable, we want all of these things to be options. We talk about it as sort of having horizontal space within your reward options and not just going very vertical. And so having places where elemental spells are viable and your powered staves are viable is good. It means powered staves keep a price that you are willing to pay, but it's not just unilaterally the best option, which is boring.
Awesome. Thank you, Kieren. I just seen a question come up in chat around spell damage and it continuing to scale as you level. I think even without knowing 100%, I'm pretty confident that we're not increasing the cap of the damage that these spells can do. That the ceiling will be the fire spells, which have the highest damage output at the moment, and the other spells will just be able to hit the same as that as you get to the same level that you unlock the fire spell. It's not that once you get past like the unlock of Fire Surge to 99 Mage, you suddenly deal more damage with Fire Surge. So there's that one answered. Okay. Interesting one here, because obviously I made a point earlier that you're not really going to notice any difference in terms of your play style, so carry on as you are, and I believe this was in direct response to that. So let's see how we handle this one. I thought the NPC rebalance was going to avoid nerfs, but Gargoyles are minus 0.5 DPS in a standard mid-level whip setup, which is significant.
So you can probably argue the point about it being significant. I do agree it's a nerf. If you go across a Slayer task, it's 5 minutes across a Slayer task or something like that, doing some rough maths. So it isn't a massive deal, but it might still be the case we've been a bit heavy-handed in some cases, and we're happy to adjust if there are examples where we've been too much. But the reason why we haven't just left the slash defense as it is because we don't want things to just get buffed across the board too heavily. Mm-hmm. So Gargoyles today will be slower than Gargoyles will be after the update if you use the right weaponry. Like, it will be a slight buff. But we've created space that by lowering slash a little bit. So lower slash a little bit, increase crush a little bit. And that's made there's a decent jump between using the right weapon. While so we could have left it at the same point, and then crush would have to be even more better, right? Like, it would have to be a substantial buff compared to what we were offering. We felt less comfortable doing that, thus narrowly lower slash, narrowly buff crush in the case of Gargoyles. Obviously, the aim being you can't just run around and use a whip everywhere and get maximum effectiveness. By the point you were making earlier, and what we've said in previous talks about this, we don't want to make whip useless, and obviously we're not doing that. It could have been, imagine it was binary. Like, imagine we went as hard as, alright, it is really weak to crush, it's got 0 crush defense, but it's got like 1,000 slash defense. We didn't want to go that approach. You totally could, But we didn't want to do that approach because it's way too big of a change. It's way too specific and removes options from players. Whip is still an option. It's just not the best option. And that's what we're going for.
Perfect. I think it makes complete sense. And I really appreciate the way that you explained that. I think it is really important to emphasize one of the things that you brought up at the start of that was that these are all proposed changes. We're doing a beta for a reason. There are going to be some cases where, as Kieren mentioned, we maybe change the defenses a little bit too much and they are significantly worse. Regardless of what is classed as significant or not, put that aside, we can change those stats. You know, like changing, I'm going to forgive me for not being a developer and speaking on developers' halves here, but changing like a slash defense number is a pretty trivial change as far as I'm considered for like one NPC, right? So if we significantly messed up something, we could just change that quite easily.
I think Kieren's your average Joe who does gargoyles with a whip, because obviously there's legitimate reasons why you might not have a bludgeon. That's quite a tough weapon to get if you're an Iron Man. The zombie axe maybe helps with that, though. There's a new weapon there. Mm-hmm. But you could just carry on killing gargoyles with a whip. And I think most people who haven't read up on the DPS calculators, which, let's be honest, the people who look up DPS calculators are the minority.
Yeah, they're also the ones that aren't going to be using the whip again anyway. You know, they're doing it to find out what the next best thing is. So the people who are using DPS calcs and know the difference are the minority and are wanting to optimize everything. Most people don't know that. A lot of people will carry on logging in after this update and probably not even notice they're getting less DPS. You know, it'll be such a marginal impact. That's what we want anyway. Cool. Well, thank you again, Kieren. I really appreciate that insight. Someone has asked what the rough time for the release of the skill rebalance is. They're apparently holding off on maxing with agility on the hope that Brimhaven buff comes in. I'll happily take this one. I believe that the intention is to wrap up with all of the Project Rebalance work, other than the run energy changes, which we mentioned as part of the skilling stuff, around the end of May. So you won't have a huge amount of time to wait. However, that's not guaranteed, so don't crucify me if it doesn't happen in May, but that's what we're aiming for. You know, so around about a month or so, just over a month from now, you should be able to see those come into effect. As for like the rest of the timeline, I'm happy to just let you guys know what our plans are. We obviously talked about skilling. That was all finalized last week, a week before last. It was last week. This week, we've started talking about defense changes for NPCs. And then I believe it's next week. No, week after next, sorry. The week after next, we're going to be talking about item changes. So by the end of April, we'll have wrapped up all of the feedback, all of the beta testing that we'll be able to do, got all that together, and then starting developing. So as long as everything goes well, we're looking for end of May kind of timeline. So yeah, sorry, Goblin, I just saw you in chat. My bad. I was like looking the 16th. Oh, that's you know, only 12 days from now. Oh yeah, there's not 12 days in a week though. Ayiza. Again, I told you, math is not my strong suit. So yeah, there you have it. All right. With the magic damage changes to bring them together, will there also be a recosting to bring the rune costs closer together as well?
Not planned. I don't think there's a massive gap between their costs. The trade-offs are, I mean, we just talked about base XP. You get better XP for your base cast. And it's just the trade-off. If you want to use Fire Blast, it's going to cost a bit more than Water Blast. But, I mean, all right, how much different is it? All right. Water Blast is 204 coins. Fire Blast is 214 coins. It's 10 GP difference a cast. This is not a big deal.
Fair point.
And also as well, Fire Tome anyway.
Yeah, it's not like the difference in you using the spells is going as well, right? The whole point is that you're going to have more reason to use all of those different spells. So there will be cases where you'll actually be using a cheaper spell and doing more damage than you would have been if you would have been using a fire spell to begin with. So I think it actually ends up balancing itself out overall.
It's splashing where it probably adds up, because you're AFKing a long time and using the spell a lot. So even a 10 GP difference obviously does add up, and I saw it mentioned in the chat.
Yeah, but we're not going to be buffing splashing, so get over it.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, I'm going to go into the next question. I think we already talked about God spells not being included. There aren't any plans for that right now, but it's something that we're keeping in mind, and there may well be in the future, but not this side of Project Rebalance. What about I think we've answered this one already, but we'll recap it. I got confused. Will you change the damage output between the elemental spells? Currently, fire is always the best option due to the extra damage from the spell. Do you want to just recover what it does, Kieren?
Yes, that is a core part of what we're offering. If you read the news post, it's in the section called Elemental Spell Scaling. Essentially, the damage for your other spells will go up until you're at your level for the fire spell. So if you're level 1 Wind Strike, it does less damage, and then it scales up. When you get to level 13, it will deal the same damage as your fire spell, and then it will not scale any further. And the same for obviously the other tiers of elemental spells.
Awesome. All right, there's a couple of questions I'm going to skip over. Someone asked if they can get an uwu. It was directed towards me, but do you want to give them an uwu, Kieren?
I can't enough. I don't get paid enough to do that.
Okay, I'll give them one, but it'll be unsatisfying.
You can go on.
Uwu. There we go. All right. Will you give more use cases to all Enchanted Bolts with the new weaknesses?
I think that's really a separate project. Like, it's not something we're looking to include here. I think we probably do realize most the the Enchanted Bolts are not very useful. There's obviously a handful which are, and we've added a new one with the Musper boss. We added a new one for the prayer effect with the Sapphire Bolt. But by and large, we know they're a bit rubbish. We're not looking to change them here, though. We can't fix everything with one Rebalance project. But it maybe can be something we look at in future.
Fair. I think it would be good to. And if these rebalances go down well, then maybe there is a case for us to be doing more of them. I mean, I don't think we need a case, but it would definitely help bolster it, right? And it's something that we've been talking about so many times. We've talked about changing NPCs, changing weapons, and all that kind of stuff, and it hasn't happened. So the fact that it is now is definitely promising for future potential change too. But I think it's got to be like, I say little and no, it can't be little and often. It's got to be a decent amount, but not too often. Because like you said at the start of the stream, we don't want to overwhelm players. We don't want to have to feel like you have to relearn the entire game. One of the beauties of old school RuneScape, at least for me personally, is that I could not play for 2 years and I could jump back in and I could play the exact same way as I did 2 years ago and the game will still feel the same. Yes, there'll be new items, there'll be new content, but like the core game is still old school, whereas so many other games update and feature creep so consistently that if you're away for like even 3-4 months at times, you can come back and it feels like a totally different game. And we don't want to remove that charm, don't want to lose that. So we have to make sure we take it in batches. So I think I cut you off. Did you want to talk more about that, or were you getting ready to uwu? Okay, that was awful. I wish I never asked you.
Sorry. What was yours?
Well, mine was intentionally disappointed. We just built up all of that, and you just gave the worst one I've ever heard.
I don't know. People seem to be enjoying it. They might be laughing rather than whatever else. But
I mean, that's fair. We're
but yeah, on your point you just made, familiarity is the word I use with that. You should never come back to old school RuneScape and feel like it's not familiar anymore.
Familiar. I think if I tried to say the word, I would just slip up on my tongue. Familiar. Yeah, see? That's why I didn't use it, but it would have been better. Okay, right. What about next question? Because we've got to wrap up soon. Can you make the Ice Demon in Chambers take full damage for the Demon Bane spells? It would make sense and give it more use.
I mean, I don't see why not. Personally, I think that's certainly a valid request. It's not something we're currently doing, but we certainly could bring it up and see if that's something we could go down. We are keen to make sure the fire spells are still probably the main way to do the boss, though. Obviously, we're making a lot of changes to the weakness system, which the Ice Demon technically is one of the things that already uses a kind of weakness system. We'll be making sure that carries on. Quite. But for Demon Bane spells, obviously it makes sense. It seems like it should be an exception to that rule.
Cool. All right, well, there's one last question I'm just going to quickly fire over, and then I'll go back over some announcements and key info. Someone has asked, are the elemental or range weaknesses going to be added to armor/player stats or just NPCs? And it is just going to be for NPCs. PvP won't be impacted in any way, shape, or form. What about the flip side, though, NPC to player? Will we have different defense types for range defense?
I don't think so. Not right now. I do think that starts to complicate things quite a bit as well, in terms of like what gear the player can wear. Obviously, right now it is just range defense, but obviously this isn't the case for melee. You've got stab, slash, crush. In theory, this could be something we explore, but I feel like that will just end up feeling as a lot of bloat in terms of what equipment offers, different things you need to read. But don't rule it out. It obviously could be another line we decide this is something we should do at some point, but not currently.
When we need some more reward space, maybe in the next raid, we'll decide to bring it out then. And we get a whole load of new armors we can use. I'm just jesting. I appreciate your actual serious answer there, Kieren. It's nearly time to wrap up, so we've got to leave on a high. Right, I want to just cover off a few things really quickly. Modsani has gone ahead and updated the update news post. So if you want to see what will be changing, hopefully next week with the Colosseum modifiers, be sure to check out that with !game update. You've got to see all of that in there. Also, there will be a mention of the Hunter rumors, I believe. Sani posted it and then deleted it, so I hope you wanted me to actually talk about it. This includes pet drop rates, ! Now live. Okay. Oh, this includes Hunter rumor rates. All right, thanks, Sani, for the live editing. Just go and check out the post. It will have new info in there that you haven't seen before. If you haven't already tried out the beta for the NPC defense changes that we've been talking about, you can go ahead and try them now. However, we are aware that there is an issue with ranged combat, which we're hoping to deploy a fix for tomorrow. The beta will be extended into next week, so if you haven't had a chance to participate, there will be time. The next batch of Project Rebalance proposals will also feature an open beta. Those will be around item changes. So if you really want, you can wait until that happens and try out item changes as well as defense changes. But it would be really appreciated if you logged in, tried them out in the beta, and gave us some feedback over the course of the next couple of days so that we can send that to developers in good time. Because as we've mentioned, we're hoping to have all of this shipped by the end of May. And we can only do that if you give us good feedback. Other than that, someone has changed the title of the stream script to say Introduction, so I just gave you that one for free. ! Video, if you don't want to read the blog, if you just prefer watching videos and listening to someone talk to you about it all, then we partnered with Coxie, who did a fantastic job of explaining what the NPC defense changes look like. So make sure you check that out with ! Video. And I believe that is everything that I needed to go over. Unless I've missed anything. Kieren, can you think of anything? I should have said that I haven't.
I don't think so.
Okay, all right. Well, I think this is a first for me where I've finished the live stream and it's just been only after, like, slightly after 6 rather than it being like 6:30. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate all of the fun vibes. Chat, you have been incredibly cute and wholesome today. We love you. Kieren, you've been incredible. Thank you for joining me and making the live stream happen, for all of your incredible answers and insight. And also thank you to Mod Druid, nearly did it again, for the production. Modsani Goblin, as well as, oh my god, I'm going to forget the mod name. Everyone else who helped me get the stream together today. Jagex, Yumi, thank you. You're a legend. I appreciate you. I think I've remembered it correctly. If not, you can slaughter me in DMs. Have a good evening. We'll see you in the next stream. Have a great weekend as well. Bye.